I've spent the last 4 years studying depth psychology. I've read hundreds of books, watched lectures to try to understand why do people stay stuck in the same negative patterns, habits, and past trauma. And what I've been trying to find out is what does it really take to make real change happen? And I've learned that you don't stay stuck because of a lack of information or not knowing what to do. The reality is we all know what it is that we need to do. We just don't do it. And the reason majority of us stay stuck is because part of your mind is working against you and you don't even know it. Here are 6 ideas from depth psychology to help you break negative patterns and heal from anxiety and past trauma. The first idea is that you are not the mask. So I have a quick story that's going to illustrate this idea. So in the middle of the night, in a Roman war camp on the Danube frontier, which is now Vienna, inside of a war tent, there's a man alone, and this man is writing. And outside of the tent, the Roman army is spread out as far as the eye can see. And tomorrow, men are going to die on this man's word. And millions of people across the Roman Empire are sleeping, and they have no idea that their future is in the hands of this one man. And this man is Marcus Aurelius. He's the emperor of Rome. And at this time, he's the most powerful man alive. But he's writing in the middle of the night because he's terrified of himself. Marcus Aurelius didn't want to be the emperor. He despised it. He was a philosopher by heart, but as an act of duty, he showed up and he put on a mask to perform the role of being an emperor. And he studied what the role did to the men before him. Nero, Caligula, Domitian, these men became the mask that they wore. The power of being emperor consumed them. And he could feel it happening to himself, that people treated him like a god. The flattery, the obedience, it seeps into you. But every night, he fought back. And in his private journal, he wrote a single reminder to himself of the danger that he fought and the danger that he faced. And he would write, "Be careful not to be Caesarified." Now, this is the emperor warning himself not to become the emperor. So Marcus Aurelius would come back to this idea for years. Every morning, he would put the mask on, and every night, he would fight to remember that this was a mask. And we know this because of the private journal that we now call meditations. The whole thing is one man writing the same reminder to himself for years that you are not the mask. So what happens is when you're born, you didn't choose your name, you didn't choose your parents, your language, or your country. You also didn't choose your beliefs. And since you depended on your parents for survival, you absorbed their worldview, their fears, their values, their interpretations of how they see the world. None of that was a conscious choice. And then from there, a pattern started to emerge. So as a child, you learned that some behaviors got you attention and approval, and certain behaviors led to punishment. So you adapted. You became who the environment and your peers wanted you to be. And you ended up suppressing parts of you that got rejected and started amplifying the parts of you that were accepted. And that's the mask. Jung calls it the persona, a version of yourself that you constructed so the world would accept you. And here's the dangerous part. Most of us, many of us, forget that it's a mask. We believe that the mask is who we are. So an example of this, of somebody wearing a mask, would be people who can't set boundaries because they're the helpful one. The person who can't show vulnerability because their mask is to be the strong one. The person who chases status because their mask is to be the successful one. Marcus Aurelius fought this every single night. He understood that the moment you believe that the mask is you end up losing access to who you truly are at your depth. So you have to ask yourself, what parts of your life did you build to maintain an image that doesn't reflect what you are at your core? Idea number 2 is, what is really controlling you? So another story to illustrate this idea. There are 2 brothers. They bring an offering to God, and God accepts Abel's and rejects Cain's. No explanation, no reason. And Cain is furious. His face, you could tell that there's anger that's burning inside of him. But underneath that anger, there's something much more primitive, which is shame. The feeling of watching someone else get chosen over yourself. And the feeling of not being good enough. And God sees this happening and says to Cain, sin is crouching at your door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over it. Now, sin in this context doesn't mean moral wrongdoing. The word in the Hebrew text is khata. It means to miss the mark, to fall short of what you're capable of. So when God is saying sin is crouching at your door, he's not warning Cain about committing a crime. He's pointing at the internal state that's taking over, the shame, the resentment, the feeling of getting passed over. That psychological condition is the sin. And if it's left undressed, it's going to put him off course from who he could be. But God doesn't punish Cain. He illuminates the source of his anger and tells him exactly what will happen if he doesn't address it. Now, Cain ignores it. He's hurt. He can't see past the wound that his ego is suffering from. So instead of looking inward, he projects his pain outward onto his brother Abel, who has what he doesn't. Cain is unable to process his emotions, and therefore he murders his brother. This is an early recording of an idea from depth psychology, which is opposing forces that exist inside of the human psyche. And the one that you've refused to look at eventually will start to control you. So Jung called that force the shadow. Now, the shadow is everything that your conscious mind doesn't know about itself. It's the parts of you that you repressed, maybe you denied, or you pushed out of awareness to be accepted. Not because that they're evil, but you rejected them at some point so you can fit in with other people. So here's how your shadow actually forms. So as you wear your mask to fit into your environment, you learn what's acceptable and what isn't. You learn through feedback from your peers of the things that you're rewarded for and the things that you're punished for. And the parts that don't fit, you push them down. But the thing is, they don't disappear. They form inside of your shadow. So let's say while growing up, you learn that anger is wrong. So you push it away. So you try not to get angry, but your anger doesn't vanish. It gets buried inside of your mind, inside of your psyche. Then it shows up as passive aggressiveness or resentment. And sometimes it explodes when you're in a stressful environment. Maybe you learn that being emotional is weak. So your emotional depth gets buried. And you wonder why you feel numb, or you feel disconnected, or you feel restless for no reason. Another example is if creativity got pushed away as impractical. So that creative drive doesn't die. It turns into this vague sense of something is missing, a restlessness that no amount of productivity can fix. So the shadow isn't only your dark side, it also holds good qualities that you've suppressed. A lot of us just throw the baby out with the bathwater. And you don't suppress because the experience was painful. We suppress because of what the experience revealed about us. So say that you go to a party and somebody disrespects you in front of your friends. The event itself isn't what gets repressed. What gets repressed is your reaction and what that reaction told you about yourself. You froze, you said nothing, you laughed it off. And now you're driving home and this heat is rising in your chest. You're not angry at them, but you're angry because you're realizing that you didn't stand up for yourself, that you were afraid, that when it mattered, you chose social approval over self-respect. And that's scary. So here's another way to think about it. Say you're in a relationship and your partner does something that crosses the line. It's disrespectful. But instead of addressing it, you rationalize it away. Not because it's traumatic, but because if you acknowledge it, if you acknowledge a disrespect, that means that you are not respected. And if you admit that, you have to do something about it. And you'd have to change your life. But you don't want to because your current way of life is comfortable. You're stuck in this comfortable trap. And that's what it means when I say if you don't like what it implies, the event, the thing that happens is a mirror and the reflection is ugly. So one of the oldest texts that we have is an instruction from God himself to look deeper, to look at the internal state, to look at what you're suppressing. And that's terrifying because when you face the truth and you tell yourself, I'm not as strong as I thought it was. I'm not as confident as I show up to be. The people that I trust are not who I need them to be. It shatters your entire worldview. But that's the actual point, because when something breaks, you have the ability to rebuild. And this time, you rebuild on truth instead of it being a story that you inherited. So idea 3 is that your triggers are a doorway to growth. So a couple weeks ago, I was consulting a client. During that process of understanding their business, the prospect shut down. They were giving me one-word answers. They got defensive. It got to a point where they were refusing to communicate like a professional. And no matter what I asked, I was just hitting a brick wall. So after 15 minutes, I got extremely angry. And I got angry to a point that was kind of unreasonable. And I called him out for his cognitive dissonance that he was showing me. He was saying one thing and he was acting as the other. And this is a pattern that I've started noticing in myself. So I took the opportunity to go deeper. I wanted to find the root where this was coming from because my ego didn't want me to find it. So the first layer was that I need people to be professional and not waste my time. So I dug a little bit deeper. The second layer is that I have zero patience for people like this. I have a low tolerance for individuals who withdraw and shut down emotionally. So I went a little bit deeper, right? Didn't feel like it was quite at its depth yet. So the third layer, I've spent my whole life dealing with emotional people who shut down and I've lost all empathy. So I was like, doesn't feel deep enough. The fourth layer is I have this feeling of worthlessness when somebody shuts down on me and I feel like I'm not worth the basic human respect of being treated like an equal. So the last layer for me was the truth because everything above that was my ego protecting me from seeing the truth. What I experienced was a complex that was firing off. So a complex is a charged bundle of thoughts, feelings, memories, beliefs that are centered around a particular theme. So for me, mine revolved around rejection and worthlessness. It was built over years of being around people who shut down emotionally, and my psyche learned to interpret that shutdown as a response of saying, you don't matter. That's the message I repeated in my brain. So the way to think about a complex is that a complex is a mini personality that lives inside of you. You could be aware of it, but many times most people don't know that it even exists. And if you've ever been at a point where you said, I don't know what got over me during a moment of high stress, that's a complex taking over. It hijacks your responses because it's very primitive before your conscious mind can step in. And these complexes become unconscious patterns that we repeat. They influence how you see reality. They can create false stories that loop in your mind. They can also lead to reactions that feel right at the time, but are often over the top. And the less conscious you are of them, the more power they hold over you. Now, this is the part of the brain that's working against you because you have the power and the choice to gain control, but many people don't. Because when you feel a strong emotion, that's a signal. It could be rage, contempt, it could be withdrawal, not feeling good enough, right? It's pointing at something that needs to be resolved and you got to address it. So the practice that we need to get into is after the moment passes, you want to sit down and peel back the layers and you want to ask yourself, what did that moment imply about me that I don't want to look at? And you won't get the answer on the first try. The first answer is always your ego version of it, right? The one that makes you the unreasonable one. So you got to keep going, but you can't stop at the first answer. The first answer is always your ego responding. It's the answer that makes sense, but it's not the answer at the depth. So keep going until you hit something that makes you uncomfortable. That's the real depth. And what you want to do is you want to be able to integrate that moment. And what that means is, one, you understand why this moment is triggering you, not just the surface reason, the real one. Two, you see what it's revealing about a wound that you haven't addressed, an idea or a pain that you have not looked at, right? And three is that you've processed it, and you've processed it to a point that the same situation no longer hijacks you, right? And it's not a one-time event. It's a daily discipline of refusing to let your ego file things away unexamined. Idea number 4 is some of the burden that you carry is not yours. So in 2013, 2 researchers discovered that many of our fears that we have are not our own. So they took a mouse and they exposed it to the smell of cherry blossoms. And every time the mouse smelled it, it got shocked. And so to the little mouse, cherry blossomed equals danger. And later the same mouse had offspring, so had children. And those children were never shocked, not even once. But the moment they smelled cherry blossoms, they would freeze in fear. And that fear wasn't learned through behavior, it was inherited through the DNA. The DNA of the offspring got altered. The fear of one generation got passed to the next. Rachel Yehuda found the same pattern in children of Holocaust survivors. They had altered stress hormones and modified gene expression governing their fear response. They were hypervigilant. anxious without having an identifiable source. They couldn't explain where it came from because it didn't come from their own experience. It was inherited. Some things that you carry are never yours to begin with. We have patterns and behaviors that are shaped by evolution, by experiences of those before us. And Jung described this as the collective unconscious. We're shaped by our own experiences, but also by instincts and images passed down from the past. Your parents also pass down a lot more than their eye color or how much muscle mass you can gain. They pass down their fears, their coping mechanisms. They shared their view of how they view the world. Not because they chose to, but because that's how the system operates. They were running the same inherited program from their parents. A lot of us will blame them for it, but it's actually your responsibility to take control. If there was abuse, right, that cycle was repeated. They lived out what others did to them. But understanding that doesn't mean that you can accept it. It takes one person to break the cycle. This is why knowing your family history matters so much, not just by a story, but more of a diagnostic tool. So if addiction runs in your family, you may carry that risk, even if you've never used substances. If anxiety is something that's a part of your family, or hypervigilance may be part of your nature. If explosive anger was common in your home, those patterns live in you by default as well. And knowing this, it kind of gives you an advantage. You're not fighting this mysterious flaw in your character, you're managing an inherited tendency. And once you name it, you can compensate for it. So you want to ask yourself, what patterns are repeated in my family across generations? What fears do I carry that I can't trace to an event in my own life? Or what emotional defaults do I fall into that look exactly like one of my parents? That's the burden that isn't yours. And the first step to putting it down is recognizing that you've been carrying it. Idea number 5 is action is always the answer. So one day, a kid goes to prison for burglary. He was smart, he was angry, but he wasn't going anywhere. His father was murdered, and his mother was broken by the system. He was bitter, he felt betrayed by the world. And in prison, he met an inmate who saw something in him, who believed in him, who poured into this young man when nobody else would. So while locked up, he started to understand the patterns in the system that kept him in the chains, that kept him locked up. So to empower himself, he started copying the dictionary by hand, every word. He read every book in the prison library. He started debating. He practiced arguments. He practiced thoughts. He practiced a completely different version of using his mind every single day. He rebuilt everything: his name, his religion, his identity, his worldview. So the boy went in as Malcolm Little. He came out as Malcolm X. So the self-help world has convinced people that awareness is the destination, to sit with your emotions, to observe your thoughts, to label your attachment styles, name your trauma. But awareness is necessary. I'm not against it. But it's only the first half of the equation. The second half is action. And that's where almost everybody stops. Your identity, who you believe yourself to be, is a collection of I am statements or stories or repeated thoughts. It's built by your childhood programming, your environment, and the mask that you built to survive. And it reinforces itself every single day through your habits, your reactions, and your choices. So to change your identity, you have to act against it repeatedly. And that's the painful part that nobody wants to talk about. It's a daily practice. So say that you recognize you're conflict avoidant. Great. Now you have to actually speak up in the next conversation where you'd stay quiet. And the one after that, and the one after that. It's a daily practice. Say that you realize you self-sabotage when things are going really well. Now you have to sit in the discomfort of things going right without blowing them up. Day after day. It's repeated action. You know that you numb yourself with work, substances, or maybe distractions to escape feelings. Great. Now you have to stop reaching for the numbing agents or substances to let the feeling actually move through you. That's what created Malcolm X. The thousands of hours of deliberate actions that rebuilt him from the ground up. Because awareness without action is just a more sophisticated way of staying stuck. So the sixth idea is that you will never be happy. So after 27 years in prison, a very dangerous man was set free. He was a revolutionary who co-founded an armed resistance movement. And his aim was to overthrow those that were in power who oppressed his people. So while in prison, he watched his friends get killed, and he broke rocks for years in prison. And when he walked out, not much had changed, but he had changed. The man who went in and the man who came out were two different people. This new man had power, real power, power over himself. And in that moment, he could have chosen revenge, but instead he chose reconciliation. The rage was gone because during those 27 years of stillness, he looked at everything inside of himself and made a decision. He decided he was going to be the author of what comes next instead of being the victim of what came before. And this man was Nelson Mandela. Most people think that the goal is to end the lows, to fix your mood, to arrive at this permanent state of happiness, but that's the wrong goal. Jung described the process of individuation as integrating the different parts of your psyche into a whole. Because until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So the goal isn't to remove the darkness. It's not to remove the unhappiness. The goal is to create a center that's so strong enough for the darkness to pass through you without shaping who you are. So you're not trying to become somebody who never feels pain. You want to be somebody who feels it to its depth, but you pick a different, non-destructive response. And the difference is very clear. Mandela walked out of prison and chose reconciliation. Another person would have waged war and might have chose revenge. Both feel the same pain. Mandela isn't consumed by it. He was able to process it. And where most people go wrong about fulfillment is that you're not going to find fulfillment or happiness outside of yourself. Not in money, not in status, not in relationships, not in achievements. Those things can add to your life, but they can't fill a void that exists at the core. And the void that you have, it gets filled when you stop running from the parts that you've been avoiding. When you face the shadow, process the complexes, put down the inherited burden, and take action to rebuild. And what you find isn't happiness, it's wholeness. And from being wholeness, you don't need the world to give you anything. You can choose freely. Even when every nerve in your body is pulling towards you to react towards chaos, you still chose your response. And then you realize that it's been inside you this entire time.